Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a while since we had a story video, and it's due in part to my computer being rebuilt. However, I missed making this content for you all, so I decided to return to my roots and edit these videos via my old laptop. With that in mind, the text-to-speech will return until I am physically able to record my voiceovers again. Now, with that disclaimer out of the way, we return to one of my favorite classes of steam locomotive, the Norfolk and Western Class A. After doing a poll on both YouTube and Twitter, the Class A Remaster won out over the Class Y, so for this story video, we take a second look at the Class A's as a whole. So, as always, sit back and enjoy. The Norfolk and Western Class A was a class of 43 to 66 for simple articulated steam locomotives, built by the railroad's own Roanoke shops between 1936 and 1950. Compared to the other articulates in the raster, the A's were the only class to be in the simple articulation design, with the Class Z's and Class Y's being both compound mallet designs, with both classes being made for tractive effort and raw power, not speed. However, with World War II looming on the horizon in Europe, the Norfolk and Western seized the opportunity to upgrade its articulated raster with something a bit more nimble. That way, the railroad wouldn't be lacking during the possible war effort. Although the exact reason the railroad went with the 266-4 arrangement is unknown, there is a possible theory on why. Outside of them needing a new articulate for their raster that was rather nimble, the railroad needed a new locomotive that could handle a very specific role, one that the Z's, Y's, nor even the later J's could do. Until the Class A's introduction, the railroad had utilized mountain types for dual service assignments, although as traffic surged, they were simply not powerful enough to move the larger and heavier trains. This is what led to the design of the A's instead of being a freight-only locomotive. They were designed with dual service in mind, having a nimble nature likewise of the Union Pacific Challenger, yet sharing the sheer power of early production Class Y. With the design agreed upon by the Roanoke Shops design team, production began in early 1936 with two test bed locomotives, numbered 1200 and 1201, being completed a few months later. During testing, railroad officials were very impressed with their performance, as the A's were capable of handling 4,800 tons at 25 miles per hour on a 0.5% grade and 7,500 tons at 64 miles per hour on level track, while exerting between 6,000 to 6,300 horsepower. This made them, at least to my knowledge, the most powerful 266-4 in the United States. But don't hold me to that information, cause I tend to be wrong in some cases. After the rigorous testing issued after their creation, the Norfolk and Western agreed to continue a full production of 8 more locomotives for operational service. After a combined 25 more being built during World War II, and another 8 more in 1949 and 1950, the railroad was satisfied with their now completed raster. This leads us into the A's operational history and how they performed while under stress. The Class A's were sought-after locomotives by crews due to their high performance capacity. Being a nimble locomotive, clocking a rated speed of 70 miles per hour, and the possibility to clock faster, the A's were the second fastest locomotive in the Norfolk and Western steam raster, only being beat by the Class J's. This was mostly due to the need for the A's dual service role, being able to handle 150 car freights on its own at lower speeds, while also being able to handle large and heavyweight commuter trains and business trains at higher speeds. Not only was the nimble nature useful with the passenger side of this role, but it also proved useful in holding troop trains for the US Army during World War II, with the A's being the best candidate for moving those specialty trains. When it comes to how powerful the locomotive was, it made itself worthy of being up there with its cousins, the Class Ys. There is no real official number on its tractive effort. As I've heard from many different sources, I've made an estimation on what the tractive effort could be. Going off the Norfolk and Western's documentation during the 1200 and 1201 tests, as well as when 1218 was in excursion service, I came to the conclusion that the A's had a tractive effort of 115,000 pounds to 125,000 pounds of force, making them not only stronger than the Challenger type altogether, but even rivaling the Allegheny type, and even possibly the Big Boy type. With that, the A's were basically their own type/mix of raw power and speed. In my eyes, they combined the nimble and fast nature of the Challenger type, specifically the Union Pacific variant, along with the earlier Y-class variants, like the Y2 and Y3. Now, a lot of this is an opinion from yours truly, as I have done significant research from across the web, and even in books about the railroad itself. So if you think some of this information is incorrect, always feel free to leave a comment about it below. It helps me understand better, plus it'll correct the information provided. Now, on to how the locomotive was operated. Normally, it depended on the train you were gonna be hauling. Whether it be a heavyweight passenger train or a large freight drag, it was varied on how the locomotive was used. If the train required more than one locomotive, let's say a 200-plus car long drag freight, the railroad had standards for how it would be hauled. Before the introduction of the A's, this standard consisted of two Class Ys on the head end, with a third locomotive, usually another Class Y, on the back end. Once the A's were introduced, the standard changed, with the A usually taking the head end, followed by a second Class Y behind it, with the train being pushed by yet again another Class Y. Was this always how long drags ran? One Class A, then to Class Ys, not particularly. Again, stuff like this varied by the cargo of said train and how much power it really needed. If the train was lighter, the A's would normally be seen alone, clocking a higher speed than normal to either make up time or to get to its destination faster. If it was a heavier train, you would normally see a Class Y due to its design. Since the mallet design was made for raw power at low speeds, the Ys could clock a lot slower, but haul near twice as much as the A's could, hence them being seen on heavier trains. With the way the A's, as well as normal freight drags, operated on the Norfolk and Western being covered, we shall move on to the next, and quite possibly my favourite, section. It's definitely not a completed story video on the Class A's without mentioning the last of them all. Nor would I feel like myself if I didn't mention the bloody thing. This, as we all should know, is 1218, the last of the A's, and the last 664 in the world. We shall enter into his story slightly, as to give context to why he was even preserved. Of course, it is well known that 1218, along with two more Class A's, were saved and used at a chemical plant as steam generators. His real story begins when he is saved and sent to Steamtown in Vermont for possible display time in 1965, after the scrapping of the other two A's, numbered 1202 and 1230. 20 years later, the now known Norfolk Southern Steam Program looked for a more powerful locomotive to aid the recently finished Class J, the famous 611. In 1987, after 2 years of being restored in Irondale, Alabama, 1218 moved under his own power for the first time in nearly 30 years. However, after having a great and prospective future in excursion service, 1218's career was cut short in 1991 due to safety concerns on the program, ending his reign as the most powerful operating steam locomotive. 1218 is now stored as a static display at the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke, Virginia. Although he has been sitting there for now 23 years, the talks about 1218 have never been more frequent. With the recent return of 611 somewhat on the main line at Shenandoah Valley, and major steam excursions happening in the near future, all eyes are on 1218 and the VMT. Will the proclaimed Beast of the East return? Only time will tell, and maybe, with a little bit of luck and a whole lot of money, we could hear that single chime echo through the hollers once again. I'd like to thank you all for joining me and for being patient with the video schedule. Until next time, folks.